It's time for Real Talk with Brian and Dan, the weekly talk radio show dedicated to discussing important real estate topics, plus insight into the local community. With a combined experience of over 50 years as local real estate brokers from the Eastside Real Estate Team at Keller Williams Realty Bellevue. Here's your hosts, Brian Levitt and Dan Edwards.
Good afternoon and welcome to Real Talk with Brian and Dan on 1150 KKNW. It's Wednesday, April 29th, 2020. We're so glad you're joining us today. In addition to listening to us on the radio, you can also see our YouTube channel. Look up the Eastside Real Estate Team. And you can also listen to past episodes anywhere there are Google Podcasts or Apple Podcasts. You can subscribe. And finally, all of our past episodes are going to be uploaded to our website at the eastsiderealestateteam.com. We are so glad you joined us today. We have an exceptional cast of members, as you can see on our broadcast today. We're excited to talk to Gloria Chen with BIS Designs and also Johnson Marshall of the Johnson Marshall Agency. But before we get to our guests today, let's start out with some real talk. So Brian, a lot of things kind of going on with virtual tools.
Right.
Obviously, we're sitting right here on a virtual item. What are buyers looking for right now in order to provide a higher level of service in the current environment?
Well, you know, it's interesting because we're doing so much of our work remotely now. We are doing in-person showings, but on a very limited basis, one broker, one buyer at a time. But we're really finding ourselves leveraging a lot of the tools that we've used for a long time. We're just doing it, we're doing it better. I mean, example is our virtual tours, our 3D tours, and now even doing virtual open houses where we will schedule an open house just like we always would, but instead of buyers walking through, they reach out to us and schedule a time for a tour on FaceTime or any of the other, video conferencing tools that we're using our iPads and our phones to walk through, show the buyer through the home in real time.
Well, I think what's been transformative, is in the past, if I had a buyer that was new or relocating to the area, it might have been more of a challenge for them for us to meet, right? Because somebody would be
Right.
flying in for an interview or a second interview or signing around for a job. And then after that, they'd want to meet with somebody to kind of get some information, but they weren't able to really get the feel of people. Now
Right.
we can actually do one of these Zoom calls. We can meet, ask a lot of questions. One of the things that I like to do is fill what we call an intake form, a buyer's intake form. So as a new buyer, there's a lot of questions that you have. Some people know a lot about what's going on in the market. Others are just learning. So we really want to know what the starting point is. So before meeting with any buyers, I send out this intake form. And what I ask the buyers to do, if it's a couple and they're buying a home together, is we ask them to each fill it out separately. Like no collaboration.
Right.
I just want you to give us the information. And you'd be surprised, Brian, the different answers we get and how it sparks some controversy, but really does encourage a good conversation as to what it is they're looking for. So we use that buyer intake form. Why don't you talk about a virtual buyer's presentation? How do we do that?
We're doing that as a shared screen on, typically a Zoom call where we can walk through the entire process, answer questions real time, and go into some pretty good detail. It's a really great educational tool to really, I view that as one of my most important roles in a real estate transaction is educating my clients. And so it's a really good tool because it's interactive. We can discuss in detail all of the ins and outs of the transaction. What's your experience been, Dan?
It really is show and tell. And I think even before the crisis, we would sit there and be looking at a computer together. So now it was easier to pull up the data so that we could show the data, bring up homes together, search together. And I think, Brian, you also mentioned now with our new Keller Williams website, people can actually schedule virtual tours.
Right.
So after we've gone through this whole process, the virtual tour, there are a couple of different ways to do a virtual tour. And I think the first one you mentioned are 3D Matterport tours, right?
Right.
So for our somebody that doesn't know what that is, kind of describe what the Matterport tour is.
It's a tour that you have, when I've done it, I've used my mouse to literally walk through, or I shouldn't say literally, virtually walk through, using the cursor to go room to room, to be able to pan left, right, up, down, and just go throughout the entire property at my own pace, looking in detail at the things I want to see. It's a really amazing technology.
Yeah, and if there's anybody out there watching and they want to learn a little bit more about this, I'll be hosting a virtual open house on Friday, 5 o'clock, and we'll be walking through a 3D tour. I think anybody can do that, right, at their leisure whenever they like. But it's a little different if you do it in a format where you're actually being guided with an agent walking you through. Because, Brian, I mean, it's one thing to say, oh, look at this house. It's another thing to say, well, how does that relate to maybe a property that like located next to a park, right? Some of the intangibles, the agent intangibles.
Looking at the details, I did a virtual open house with a client recently. Well, they purchased the home, but I mean, example, we used FaceTime, and as I'm walking through, they're asking questions. Remember, one of the buyers really wanted to see the kitchen cabinets, so opening the cabinets, each one, and describing what I'm seeing while they're looking at the video, and did that in real time. So I think it was really helpful for them to be able to really closely look at the things they wanted to see.
Yeah, and I think a final point is we talked a lot about buyer tools, right, in this environment, because a lot of people thinking about that. But I want to express to any potential sellers out there, these tools obviously that we're talking about serve you, but most importantly is that the data that we get. So, I can look at any of the advertising that we've done out, and I can show you how many impressions led to clicks, and how many clicks led to actual leads. So we're able to really target and get some feedback in real time what your level of activity is. So we don't have a whole lot of time to go into all the other tools for sellers, but those are some things that we start out with.
Right.
So that's it. That's the end of our segment. So I appreciate the conversation, Brian, of course, as always. If you're interested in this topic and any other Real Talk segments, you can find them on our website at the eastsiderealestateteam.com/blog. Look for the tips. And any specific real estate questions, you can reach out to us directly at 425-200-4093. Thanks for listening. Coming up next, we're going to be speaking with our lender for our Mortgage Moment segment. After this commercial break, we're going to hear from Aram Maravosov, thank you, and experienced loan officer with Movement Mortgage. So more Real Talk right after this short break.